I was very studious. I loved studying. I loved history. In some places, people say, "What on earth did you do history for?" But it was the best thing I ever did, because understanding why people do the things they do, what motivates them, belief systems, all of that type of thing is actually pretty relevant to what I've ended up doing today.
We noticed at some point that actually what we've done in the past, because we've been focused like that on what we're going to achieve, doesn't always work when we need other people to achieve certain things that maybe work in different ways.
One of the things that's clear is that you have to be you need some resilience, and you need some persistence, and sticking with things, and I suppose being intellectually curious. The person who's able to have this perfect life of the perfect relationships, perfect work, perfect everything, and good luck, because generally something's going to give.
Hello and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest. Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted that Ben Page has joined me in the studio today. Ben, welcome.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Very good. Our international audience would appreciate that. Ben, thanks for coming on the show. Why don't we start by you introducing yourself to the audience about who you are and what your current focus is?
So I suppose I'm a market researcher, although hopefully a little bit more than that. But I'm this global chief executive of Ipsos, which is one of the largest research companies in the world. We're in 90 countries, 20,000 people. I've done this for my entire life. So I started off in the 1980s at a company called Mori. And in the year 2000, I and some other people did a leverage buyout. We sold the business to Ipsos, and I didn't think I'd stay very long. But anyway, 20 years later, I'm the global chief executive of Ipsos, which is a French company. So in a nutshell, that's my sort of potted official history.
Super. Personal life. Tell us about your personal life, Ben.
Well, I'm married. I'm in my second marriage. For those of you who haven't tried a second marriage, allegedly second marriages are happier than the first marriage. In my case, that's true. I do find, actually, in my personal life, looking at data, I find it quite a way of reassuring myself. When I got separated from my first wife and was miserable in my 40s with my son as a teenager, I looked at the data and it showed me that as a typical Western person, it's absolutely normal to be more miserable in your 40s. And I found it rather cheery to know that I would probably get happier, and I have.
And we're going to find out all the story about that. I've got something in common with you. I'm in my second marriage. I'm not going to any more now. And yeah, I agree with you. I am happy. I'm in my 50s, and I think we're getting there. So let's see what your story brings.
Okay.
Thank you for that. So let's go back to what this podcast is about. How does our childhood inform our early leadership? What does that mean in terms of why we are successful? And then how does that change as we mature over time? So let's start with your childhood. Tell us about that.
Well, my parents were extremely unusual people. My father was an academic who never published anything and literally spent decades just reading. He was a Marxist and not particularly communicative. And then my mother was a photographer and a teacher, very outward going, etc. So I can't imagine how they ever got together in the first place. And in fact, they were introduced by my grandparents, who were all professional artists, because otherwise there's no way my mother would have ever shacked up with my father. So they were together. They got divorced when I was 7, and my mother ran off with a blacksmith. And 1972 in Devon, where I was growing up, was probably a little bit like 1968 in San Francisco. So they were having a wild time. I think one thing that's very clear is that, and for younger people, I don't know how this resonates, but people didn't worry as much about children in the 60s and 70s as they do now. I mean, that's a very big generalization, but I think it's broadly true. You can just look at how much time surveys, and remember, I'm a survey guy, surveys show that how much time men spend with their children, which is a lot more. So we were my brother and I were sort of left to our own devices in the middle of Devon, while my mother had a great time, and we went to a remote village school, and that was all a bit of a weird transition from growing up in a sort of closeted academic environment. So I think that made me quite self-reliant. And then, anyway, my mother had a sort of fairly tumultuous series of relationships after that. I was very studious. I loved studying. I loved history. In the end, I went to Oxford. I went to a comp, but after that, I went to Oxford and did history, which in some places people say, what on earth did you do history for? But it was the best thing I ever did, because understanding why people do the things they do, what motivates them, belief systems, all of that type of thing is actually pretty relevant to what I've ended up doing today. Although I never imagined I'd be running a large business or anything like that. So I did that. I ran a nightclub while I was there, which was great fun. And I thought I'd move to London afterwards. I didn't want to go into banking or the city, because at the time I was left-wing and idealistic rather than cynical. So I thought I'd finish that and I'd go to London and I'd sort of have a great time. And it was the mid to late 80s and everything was fun, etc. Anyway, it turned out to be harder to get a job than I imagined. So I had to, and harder to be a DJ. So I had to get a job, and I took a job on the back pages of Time Out magazine at a company I have subsequently bought, but it was a company, and I was doing telephone interviewing in a place in Oxford Street. And I did that for about 6 months, and it was pretty dull. And I kept applying for jobs in publishing and things like that and not getting them. And so in 1987, I thought I'd better join a graduate training scheme. And I joined the Mori, opinion polls, Mori graduate training scheme. And I thought I'd stay 2 or 3 years.
Let's just stop there. No, let's just stop there. It's really interesting. So you've got this background in Devon, and for those that obviously don't know Devon, it's a beautiful, spacious place to be. Rural and lots of childhood adventures. And then you obviously started to think, what was it I was going to do? So bear in mind you joined Mori. Was there any point just before that you'd had some kind of dream or feeling what I wanted to do in my life, or was it a case of just getting something that I could do?
I'd always read that we were publishing in the Sunday Times every week when I was during that period in the 80s, and I was always interested in politics and stuff, what's going on in the world. I read the papers, so to speak, so I knew about them, but I didn't, and it seemed sort of vaguely interesting. But no, it was not. There was no plan at all. I wanted to write a great novel in my 20s, or be a famous TV personality or something. I didn't want to be an executive.
And in the 80s, obviously, it's a very interesting time. I grew up in the 80s. I was a teenager then. And if we go back to your upbringing and having that ability to be self-reliant, because you had to be, you and your brother, how did that manifest in those early roles you had?
Well, I think one of the things that's clear is that you have to be you need some resilience, and you need some persistence, and, sticking with things, and I suppose being intellectually curious, and all of those things. Being good at passing exams is actually a reasonable skill for market research, because it means you can retain information. I'm not saying exams are the be all and end all, but particularly the sort of exams we used to sit in the 1980s. My history course at Oxford hadn't changed in 100 years. I think I was one of the last cohort to sit it. But basically, you had no exams at all for 3 years after the first ones at the end of the first term. So some people went a bit mad, and then you had 5 days, just 5 days of exams. That was it, and you got your degree or you didn't. So I'm reasonably good at. I think that. So I enjoyed exams. I liked learning. I'm interested in reading, and so that sort of studiousness and it was still, I had to work pretty hard to do the Oxford entrance on my own, because we didn't have a tutor. We weren't being tutored or anything at my technical college. I think that shows that you've got some sort of persistence. So, and the thing about the history degree is that you talk to your professor or whoever, and he gives you a list of 50 books. And somehow you're supposed to read these 50 books and turn up with 12 pages of beautifully written text the following week as a beautiful exposition of the ideas in said books and what your theory is about what King John was really doing with the barons in 1215. Now, it took me a long time, because I'm pretty stupid, to realize that history is, of course, made up, because the information is incomplete. Various people who were writing about it nearer the time might have been biased in some way, etc. And so all we really have to know what King John was doing is a few Latin documents and some things that we know happened. But actually, you see, market research is a little bit like that, because we have incomplete information. We haven't spoken to absolutely everybody, and we haven't asked them every single question. And sometimes the data is a bit wrong. So again, you have to, from all of that, to advise your clients, work out what is going on here, tell a story, because again, you can't give them 2 million pieces of information. You can, but they can't absorb it. So you need to therefore edit it subjectively into something that makes sense, you can sustain. So all of that stuff, I think, ultimately helped me be successful in this sort of gig.
And what you're talking about there, obviously, is insight, isn't it? And then people do whatever they want with that. So, with insight in mind, when you were in your 20s and you were in the role that you were in, we've got this theme here of an achievement orientation.
Yeah,
You were
I
very
think
good
that's
at
pretty.
passing.
And
Yeah,
you
exactly.
need to want to do it. And I think that's one thing about these leadership roles. People who tell you, and maybe there are much better people than me, that you can do a nice 9 to 5 job, go home every day, cook dinner, and have a nice, and relax. Well, I'm glad. I'm very impressed. I need these people's names and numbers because I want their secret. But in general, I think you do have to apply yourself, and that's the thing that ultimately is one of the things that differentiates people. How it's not about just working hard. Obviously, you should try and be intelligent about how you apply yourself. But it is not everybody wants to do the things that are necessary to make it. Would be my observation.
I agree. And then on the flip side of that, even though I understand what you're saying, there are some people who have achieved great success by focusing on achievement, and yet there are many sacrifices that they make, which in
Oh God.
hindsight they think, did I have to make that one? I definitely probably had to make that one. But actually, because I was so in the moment about focusing on achievement, there were some things that fell by the wayside. What was that
Well,
like
my
for you in
you
your
know my
20s?
my
Yeah.
my first wife I love dearly, and my current wife and I and her and my son spend we go out at Christmas and things. So
Hmm.
we're all affable. But basically, yes, we worked like maniacs in the 1980s in this business. And when my son was born, I think I was being pestered to go back to work after 7 days. My wife had had a very difficult birth. I didn't appreciate, because I was a young man. I was 20, just 30. I didn't appreciate that she had postnatal depression, and I was working like a dog, 10, 12 hours a day. And of course, that wasn't good for my marriage. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. But I think, yes, you do. You are the person who's able to have this perfect life of the perfect relationships, perfect work, perfect everything. And, good luck, because generally something's going to give.
Yeah. So talk to us then about this maturity as you were going through and as you were achieving. You obviously then started having people working for you, and as you're progressing, we noticed at some point that actually what we've done in the past, because we've been focused like that on what we're going to achieve, doesn't always work when we need other people to achieve certain things that maybe work in different ways. So when did you first notice that maybe you had to change your leadership
Well, it's,
style?
prob- it's probably when I got my first division to run inside the business. And of course, you know that you're better at doing certain things than other people. But of course, you can't, unless you're going to do their work for them, you can't do it. I remember I was headhunted once by McKinsey for something. And they were saying, Ben, you have to understand that some people have different standards. They're not necessarily inferior. And I'm like, they bloody are. But no, and I think so. Understanding that and then just applying the 80-20 rule. In the end, you have to say, well, look, this isn't a lot of the stuff that's leaving this team. I would not be 100% happy with if it was mine, but I can't. I have to let go. So it's realizing that you're going to have to let go. That's one of the first sort of problems that happens to specialized people like me. And the other one is, no emotional intelligence. But anyway, that's another issue. So yes, it was that, but, learning that you're just going to have to let things go. It will be good enough. And now, if I'm brutally honest, I don't know. I'm sure if I looked at all the outputs, we do 6,000 projects a year. If I looked at all of them, there would be lots of things I would probably want to change, but I haven't got time because I'm in charge of 20,000 people. So all I can do is look at the CSMs, or the customer satisfaction monitor, on my phone for every project. And if there are some that are interesting, I will poke my nose in, but you have to let go.
Love that. So let's go back to the divisional role, because I just want to talk a little bit more detail about the letting go bit, because I agree with you, but it's very, very difficult to do. And sometimes it's initiated by an event that happens to us and it almost jolts us and forces us to think,
Yeah.
I need to let go. And other times it's encouraged by oneself, by some inner development. So what was it for you? What was that catalyst? Say,
It was
I,
just simply the time I had, the volume of, the number of people I had reporting to me, the stuff leaving the building is going up all the time. Our
yeah.
growth at this point was like this. And there was no way I could look at everything. So I had to try, and obviously you're trying to then build a culture and, a way of doing things, protocols, so that people know what good looks like, and you build a system that is self-replicating, because you can't do it yourself. I mean, you want to, so I got it down to sort of being able to spend 5 minutes looking at something that I'd have spent 2 hours looking at before. There's a few things you're going to just check that you're happy with. And then it's, do you trust people? And as you get more and more senior, you have to trust people more and more.
Sure. And let's go into emotional intelligence. You mentioned it there. I agree with you. It's one of those key areas where if we can develop it, we have to create time to develop it. It can make a difference in terms of leadership. What were your challenges with that in terms of recognizing?
Oh God, I was in my 30s. We were growing rapidly, and I was a young man in a hurry. So I would do things like stroll out of my office onto the floor, and I'd say, James, could you come and talk to me, please? Everybody, gather round. Look at this. Look at what James has just sent to the Prime Minister. James, could you explain to me why this document is littered with typographical errors? Was there a cunning plan in making us look like fuckwits? And obviously that wasn't the best thing to do. So I was fortunately I had people to help me here, and I was given I wasn't given a coach, but I was given a sidekick whose job was to say, Ben didn't mean to say that. What he really meant was that you really shouldn't send things like that to the Prime Minister. So I learned to get other people to do things that I needed to develop, like being nice to people. I've now learned it, fortunately. But I learned that humiliating people in front of lots of others is not a good thing, and it's better to give feedback in private. So gradually I softened up. I used to be a bit of a monster, so I learned that the best, to motivate people. And the other thing I used to do similarly was I used to love, when I first took over a division, I took everybody to the pub on Fridays, because I thought, I'd risen up from the ranks. So, and we were doing incredibly well. So take everybody to the pub on Fridays and put the company credit card behind the bar and buy them vast amounts of alcohol. And it took me about 3 months to realize that they don't want to be, these are not my friends. They don't want to go drinking with the boss. They just want somebody who's fair, who listens to them, who's looking out for them, who tells them what, explains what to do. So all of that sort of stuff I learned in my 30s. And thank you, Brian Goschalk, if you're listening to this.
Love that. So let's talk about some of the bumps in the road that we come up against, because obviously you're a successful leader in a very large organization, but it's not a straight line for people when they
absolutely not
roles. So what about you? What have been the biggest bumps for you along the way?
Well, I mean, actually, to be honest, before that, I probably wasted about 5 years because I was just a bit chippy and difficult. So I probably could have got promoted much earlier, but I was sort of quite difficult. And I think the other thing was I wasn't totally committed, and there was a sort of Damascene, what is it? What do you say on the road to Damascus? Where is it, Saul and Paul or something? I can't even. My biblical knowledge is limited because of my atheist father. But anyway, I had this sort of Damascene conversion where I was about 30. I'd had my son. I wasn't earning that much, and I'd always been sort of saying, "Look, I need to earn a bit more money. I've got a big mortgage in central London, blah blah." And they're like, "Oh, we can't afford it." So I looked around for other jobs, and I found out that I'd have to retrain, and I'd earn even less than I was there. So I was, oh bloody hell, I'm going to have to do this really seriously. And it was only at that point, when I was about 30, so I could have done this at 25 because I started at 22. I decided, okay, I won't just be good at my job. I will be as good as I can be, or brilliant, or whatever you want to call it. And it was only when I did that suddenly, things started to fall into place. I did get offered another job by a competitor, and I think they trebled my salary, so I stayed. So it's otherwise history, and luck, and how this thing works out, of course, is interesting. If I'd left, God knows, I'd be doing something else. So it was that decision to be not just good at my job, but to be brilliant at my job, and it's quite demanding. I met an old secretary in New Zealand. It must be 10 or 15 years ago. And she said, oh, Ben, if you were working like you worked in your 30s, you'd be dead by now. So, I mean, that's another thing, learning to be a bit kind to yourself. But in your 30s, you're young and dumb and whatever. So if you can be cleverer than me, then good for you. It took me a bit of time to work that out. But it is also this decision not just to be good at your job, but to be absolutely on it. And again, not everybody wants to do that. I was doing okay. I'd been promoted. I was, ahead of my cohort. But it was only at that point that I got involved in the leverage buyout that we did, and I guess, and then the rest of my career.
Sure. And at what point did you feel that it was possible that you would become the group CEO?
Oh God, it's a few years ago. there's an interesting history to this, which some of which is in the public domain. So no, there was an internal competition to become the global chief executive, and I didn't want to. I was like, listen, look, they're going to want to appoint somebody French. It's a proud French company. The board meetings are in French, and my French is somewhat limited. But I was encouraged to do so, and anyway, and here I am, very very crudely. There were some twists along the way in that process where an external candidate was considered and then fired before she was started by the board. So that was an interesting. That was nothing to do with me. So I've have no, and I was perfectly happy doing my previous role, which was running the UK and Ireland, because I knew lots of people in London. Great company. I'd spent my life in London. So no, but I think when you're offered, if you've been working in a business for a long time, if you're offered the global role, do you say, we know one of the things that we know, Andrew, is that from psychological, theory, we always regret the things we don't do more than the things we do. So I figured if I don't do it, I'll always be wondering how brilliant I would have been if I had done it. And as I've now done it, I can find out how brilliant I'm not, or am, or whatever.
And what about you then? What's the one thing that you regret not doing?
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, my son has an amazing life. He's a fashion designer, and I just worked like a dog for a long time, probably not as cleverly as I could have done. I think also you try and you rationalize your past, don't you? So, there's all sorts of things. In theory, I'd love to have taken more time. If I went straight from school to university to literally pretty much this job, or a version of this job at the bottom of the organization. I never had a year out or any sabbatical. I think, if I go to my board now and say, I'm thinking of having a year off, can I just come back as the chief executive in about a year? I'm not sure that would go down too well. So, but that, yes, something like that, maybe some better summers, but it is what it is. I think the one thing is you do have to take time to step back, refresh your batteries, travel for your own sake, not just seeing the business, because I travel a lot for work, and you just need to take that downtime whenever you can find it, because most of the time you aren't going to find it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's talk about that, because it's a really interesting point. Again, I work with many CEOs who've said the similar thing to you. It's just linking to the point you said about being kind to yourself. So when did you actually learn to seek support from those around you to help you to do that? Because it's all very well saying to be kind to ourselves, but you do need people around you who can help you at least create the time and space to do that and recharge the batteries.
Probably about 20 years ago, I was doing, it was actually something run by the old what we used to be called the Industrial Society. God knows what it's called now, but it was something again that somebody, sent me on for my development. And I've always believed that these type of residential things where you perhaps got different speakers from different sectors, I think we even had a bishop come and speak to us. But the interesting thing is you're with a peer group of people who don't know you from your own organization. And then if they all tell you you're a bit of a monster, then you're like, okay, maybe I'm a bit of a monster. And also, of course, part of that was, you can't deliver for your people if you're not sleeping and eating and exercising properly yourself. You can't do that. You need to be there for people, which is an important part of leadership. You also need to look after yourself. And that was something that sort of taught me that. I came back to the office and printed red cards for everybody, so that they could, if I was overstepping the mark, they could hold up a red card, with permission to tell me to lay off a bit.
Did it work?
And I don't think they ever used it, but maybe there was the idea, the thought that counts. Yeah, but
Absolutely.
I think it's just natural. And then I think the episodes of COVID, but also people working in hybrid mode now, which virtually everybody does, and even I get a day or two a month at home these days. I think again that helps on some aspects of work-life balance, and maybe just you are more likely to have a lunch hour rather than. I mean, if you're French, you go to the canteen and spend some time there. If you're British, you eat your sandwich from Pret and you're back at your desk. But just making, I've learned that over the last 20 years, I reckon.
Yeah, and that leads into a lovely point, which many chief executives are really grappling with at the moment. So, people of our age who are now in chief executive positions and have real responsibility are living in this three-dimensional world of people, profit, planet, and it's real because our investors now are actually starting to look at this in terms of where people are putting their money. So, bearing that in mind and a hybrid culture, what is there left for you to do in terms of changing your leadership style to accommodate all of these things to make sure you're still successful in the next 5 years?
Well, I think it's still about getting things done and getting people to get things done, which is about prioritization. And increasingly, it's about making sure that you've got the right people in the right roles. I can't do 20,000 people's work for them. I can try and make sure that I've got the right people running each of the 90 markets, the right people overseeing different business lines globally, and that those personnel issues start to become more and more important. And one of the more, and that's really, you have to spend time on that, because you make the wrong decision. And not all, we've all had hiring, and we've all made mistakes sometimes in hiring people. You live with the consequences for a long time, and it can become very, very profound. Certainly in our business, the role of the country manager and how they behave is fundamental to what happens in an individual market.
I get that. So let's think now about people out there that have been listening to this. And what I love about your story is you've been headhunted a few times, yet you've been loyal with some pay increases to obviously Mori and Ipsos. So if you've got somebody out there that maybe does what they love, they really enjoy it, and yet they're being tempted to maybe go somewhere else for the grass that looks green on the other side, what advice would you give them to contemplate and make that decision? Because you've had to do that.
It partly depends how old they are. There is statistical evidence that changing jobs or employers in your 20s, I think on average means you earn about 6% more, but that may only be in the short term. I don't know. I think a lot of boards actually want to see people. I think my CV is relatively abnormal, having started as a trainee and stayed until I became the global chief executive. I mean, that does happen occasionally, but it's not that common. And people actually like to see, yes, they work, a bit of bank financial experience, more international experience, different settings. I think probably is attractive. So no, I don't have any black and white answer on that. I think look at the opportunity. I think the grass is sometimes always greener, but you're talking to the guy who stayed in the same company for his whole life. So I'm not the right person to ask. But I certainly, when I'm looking at people's experience, I like to see people who've done a chunk of time in one place. What I don't like is somebody who's done 20 years of 2 years everywhere, because I always think you haven't had to stay around and clean up your own mess. And that that's it's easy to if you get your timing right, you get in for the 3 good years and it's fine. It's when you stick with things through business cycles, then that person's got a bit of grit about them.
Absolutely. I'd like to ask a question about your industry now as well. There are many people out there that will obviously recognise the name of Ipsos, and at the very least, probably at least once a year, understand what it is that you're doing in terms of the government polls for various things that are happening. So what about your industry? How does AI, how does the changing nature of people interacting with various things in the world affect your industry and the way that you need to lead within it now as Ipsos?
Well, it's becoming more and more technical. We're moving away from surveys to passive measurement, so tracking people on their phones with their permission, or looking at what they do on screens and just measuring that through date router type data. And then AI, of course, we've got our own. I realized as soon as Open AI came out, that this was going to be a game change, one of those things that was going to be a game changer. I hate that expression, but we built our own in-house safe sandbox version. We've got about 14 large language models now there. We're a test site for 2 of the biggest tech companies in the world, and I've got 7,000 people using it on a regular basis. And we've got prompt libraries now. With some of the prompts are 33 pages of text long. So you're seeing a lot more automation, and that's de-skilling people actually, which is also a challenge, because the core skills in my industry are, making sure that you understanding what a smallish number of people, 1,000 out of 5 million or 100 million, are thinking, and from that 1,000 being able to extrapolate to what the rest of the 1 million or 10 million or 100 million think. That's basically the law of statistics. It goes back to an 18th century clergyman called Bayes. But anyway, of course, if it's now automated and it's all done for you in a back office somewhere in Romania or wherever, then you've actually you're now somebody who you're doing this stuff, but do you actually understand where it's come from? So I may be slightly Luddite, but I'm sort of a little bit concerned about that. But broadly, you can now process billions of pieces of information, social media data, mine it for insights, etc., in a few minutes. I mean, we've got stuff that we do now. We wrote 50 reports for 50 different countries about a report that we've just released called Ipsos Global Trends. And we were able to get the AI to write something that sort of somebody with 2 or 3 years would probably have done back in the day when I was young. It was able to do that in about sort of 5 to 10 minutes. It would have taken, 30 years ago, 5 weeks or something. So, so I think being more flexible, but I think we believe in human intelligence and artificial intelligence. So, what you can't see is AI is quite good for being comprehensive, but it can be a little bit superficial. It doesn't always make lateral connections. I mean, all it is a very sophisticated pattern recognition machine at the moment. It's not actually thinking. It's spotting patterns and then reassembling them in a very clever way. But I think getting more comfortable with all of that technology, how to use it. I mean, I wrote a paper 25 years ago that said that by 2020 we would have ceased all data collection as a business, because we would just be looking at all of the information that was flowing around. Now, I may have been slightly early in that prediction. I mean, we're still, the vast bulk of our business is collecting data at the moment, but increasingly there will be other sources of information they won't necessarily be the same as a survey, but can get you quite close to it. And then you have to work out, is it worth paying for the survey? So we are, of course, trying to disintermediate ourselves before we're disintermediated by anything else. And our industry has seen ongoing waves of technology over the last 50 years. We used to just do postal surveys, then we did face-to-face, then we did telephone, then we did online, then we used automated platforms to do online surveys, and now we have generative AI. So, and each of those changes has been deflationary, but the volume of research conducted has expanded and we've stayed relevant. But we have changed the skills of some of the people while we've been doing that.
Well, I'm pleased to say that generative AI won't be able to replace you anytime soon. Know. So that's good. This is the real version of you. I can guarantee that. I'm going to finish, Ben, with a final question, and I want you to take a little bit of time to reflect on this, because we've heard through this podcast about how driven you've been to succeed in whatever you've chosen to do. So for me, it's about, what are the dreams left for Ben Page? Personally, what is it that's yet to be achieved out there for you personally as well as professionally? And I'm just really interested to hear that.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, I think I have lots of fantasy sort of activities. Don't worry, they're all suitable for daytime broadcasting. So one is to walk from the top of Sweden down to the bottom of Sicily, looking at art and history on the way. Whether I will ever get round to that and whether I'd get utterly fed up after about 3 days, I don't know, but that's always been a sort of thing I've liked the idea of, and maybe write about it. Yes, the other fantasy is, go and buy a herd of buffalo cows down near Naples and breed make Ben's buffaloes the finest buffalo mozzarella in the world. Now, I mean, again, I'd probably be bored out of my mind after a month or two, but it's nice to have these sort of alternative existences that you could do. I have thought about getting a nice house somewhere in Italy, except we suddenly found my wife doesn't like snakes, and there are quite a lot of places in Italy have snakes. And it's also quite hot these days in the summer, so we'll see. No, I'm still, in my spare time, I still read a lot of history. Renaissance and the sort of early modern Baroque period, and actually, to be honest, there's all sorts of things you can take from how billionaires were behaving in Florence or Venice in 1500 to how billionaires behave today. But anyway, that's perhaps another thing. So I'm still curious about things. Professionally, though, because I'm driven, getting Ipsos's share price to an amazing level, making the company grow at, more than 5% every single year like a machine. That will keep me busy for another 5 years or so, I would imagine.
Super. Well, Ben, I really appreciated you coming on the show today. We've got so many people out there who have resonated with your story and understand the kind of things you've been talking about today. And hopefully it's made them think about where they are right now and what is it they need to do next to continue to be successful. So thanks again for being on the show today, Ben.
Pleasure. And you reminded me of some things I'd forgotten about. So that was thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser. and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.